Good leadership is good not only for you as a leader, but it can be instrumental in developing others, attaining better business results, and providing direction, just to name a few necessary leadership competencies. But how do leaders handle the impostor syndrome, or how do they manage their time efficiently? Nils Vinje will tell us how to become the CEO of your career through his 4 pillars of leadership. Let's listen to Nils. Welcome to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katrina Burrus, and today we have Nils Vinje. Nils, tell us about your 4 pillars of leadership.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today, Katrina. Appreciate it. And talk a little bit about leadership.
Great.
So I wrote a book in 2020 called 30-Day Leadership Playbook, Your Guide to Becoming the Leader You Have Always Wanted to Be. I do offer a free digital download of this book at 3030dayleadership.com/book. And in the book, I cover leadership from the topic of 4 main pillars. And these are pillar number 1 is leading yourself. Pillar number 2 is leading others. Pillar number 3 is leading with communication. And pillar number 4 is leading with metrics. And before I dig into any one of these in particular, Katrina, is there one of those that jumps out that you would like to know a little bit more about?
I think all 4. So let's start with leading.
Fair enough. Leading yourself. So leading yourself is all about one of the most important things, taking control of your leadership psychology. And I call this bulletproofing your leadership psychology because there is an awful lot of psychology that is involved in leadership. I'm sure you would agree with me there. And so some of the core things that we're going to focus on there are intended to build confidence in the leader and ultimately help them overcome things like imposter syndrome, which I've certainly struggled with in my past. Most every leader I've ever connected with and talked to and worked with has struggled with it as well. It is one of the
so
most
how do you help them with the imposter syndrome?
So if we look at the root of imposter syndrome, it really comes from the comparison of ourselves to someone else or ourselves to an ideal something that exists out there, whether it's a performance in a role or another person or somebody else's performance in a different role. And what that is doing is essentially taking your focus and shifting it away from you and what you can control and putting your focus on something else, which is outside of your control. So my job in this area is to help bring the control back to the individual, to help them claim their strengths so that they are focused on what they are naturally talented to do and not focused on comparing themselves to someone else.
I think that's a good point. I remember when I was first in my early career coaching a very powerful CEO, and I felt the imposter syndrome. And then when I realized, I said, okay, I'm focusing on me and what a perception I'm giving instead of really focusing on him and what I can do best for him. And that helped a lot.
Yes.
Yes. And it's surprising how many CEOs have the imposter syndrome. So a good point on your part, for sure.
I don't think anybody's immune to it, frankly. And it is pervasive. It doesn't get talked about all that often, but it is an undercurrent in everything, especially anybody in a leadership position, because we believe, things that are just, we make up and it's just part of the game. But if we shift that control back to ourselves, then we choose where our focus goes and we have the power to overcome it. And know that it's going to come up in the future. That's okay. But shifting the focus is what's going to give us the key.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about shifting the focus. I gave you an example where I was more worried about the impression I gave instead of focusing on my client and what he needs. Once I was aware, I could shift it. What do you propose to shift?
So before we get to the shift, I love to use a tool and an exercise that I call claiming your strengths. And I'm sure you, like me, have taken virtually every assessment there is out there. And my favorite, number 1, is the Clifton Strengths Finder assessment, for the simple fact that it provides a language to describe what you are naturally talented to do. Now, the reason why that is so powerful is that everybody conceptually knows what they're talented to do. They know what they like to do. They talk in generalities. But when you have a very specific language that describes how you are wired and how you operate and how you see the world, then that gives you tremendous amount of confidence to know that you can do more of work that is aligned with your strengths. That again brings the focus back to you. So one of the tools that I use in helping to build confidence to overcome imposter syndrome is this claiming your strengths process. And I use the Strengths Finder results. So when individuals take that, we look at their top 5 strengths. We go through a series of exercises and questions to identify how they are going to be able to articulate their unique strengths and their unique talents. And when they focus on that, brings the focus back to themselves. They're not looking at other people. And they know that when they come to the table and they do work that is aligned with their strengths, that they will produce an incredible result because it's how they're naturally wired.
Excellent. So that's the first, leading yourself, understanding your imposter syndrome, understanding your strengths to overcome it. And
Yes.
then the other is leading others.
Yes. So the next major pillar is leading others. And this is all about the immediate team that you work with and that you manage and lead. And so leading yourself, 100% focused on you. Leading others, now we start to branch out into the other people that are around you for the vast majority of, the working time as you're working with your team. This one involves a couple of key areas. Number one, how to build a connected team. A group of individuals coming together will not just organically, most of the time, produce a phenomenal result. However, when leaders create an identity that represents what it means to be this part of this team, and they create that identity with the team, then there is a massive opportunity for people to align to that identity and all of a sudden be incredibly more committed because they're part of something that's bigger than themselves. So there's a whole piece, we won't go into too much detail here, but the element of a team identity is really, really important from a leadership perspective.
Building connectedness in the team and create an identity. Can you just comment on that a little more before you go on the next point?
Sure. So there are three things and one other additional piece that I think are absolutely critical to a team identity. And for my experience and for my purpose, form the foundation of a high performing team. Number one is a very clearly defined purpose statement. And this is nothing more complex than the purpose of this team, whatever the team is X. And having ultimate clarity, not just you, the leader, but every individual on the team, knowing exactly what the purpose of the team is. You'd be surprised how many times I've run this, an environment working with a client, and I've asked everybody on the team, and let's say there's 10 people on the team. I say, what's the purpose of this team? I get 10 different answers. And sometimes they're widely different. So the very clear purpose statement is critically important. Number two is a set of 3 core values. And this just represents essentially think of it as the how we're going to go about doing the work that we do every day. And the core values serve as the backbone to say, this is what I agree to uphold in being part of this team. And this is what I agree to hold other people accountable in being part of this team. The third piece is the team brand. And this really kind of represents the identity as a whole. And this is where we get to have a lot of fun. And, this can be a fictional character. It can be something that's real, something that's not real. I've, run the gamut on the names of the teams that I've run in the past, everything from, movie characters to heroes in cartoons. So this is really a place that we look at the purpose statement, we look at the core values, then all of a sudden we say, well, what represents all of these things? What are the things that come to mind, either animate or inanimate objects? And we create this identity. And when you have this identity, that's what people really want to be part of, because it's very, very clearly defined what it means to be part of this team, which is now called X. So this is not about being the leader's team. This is not about being team, whatever your department name is. This is about being part of a unique identity that has been created with the team that everybody had a hand in. And that's an incredibly powerful way to build a connected team.
Excellent. Nicely explained.
Thank
So
you.
now the next one is communication.
Yes. So as we get into the leading with communication pillar, now we're talking about how do you as a leader communicate your incredible value and that of your team to people outside of your immediate team. And here's the number one problem that most people run into when they get and want to communicate more effectively outside of their immediate team, is they forget that there's something called the crisis of context. And what this means is that we oftentimes make the assumption that everyone else knows the same level of context and has the same level of context about our work that we do. Now, this is true on your team because you're in the work, in the field, in the weeds, day to day, day in, day out, and everybody knows the same level of context. However, as soon as you go outside of your immediate team, that context level drops dramatically. And if you are not communicating at an appropriate level that meets the other person where they are from a context perspective, you are going to run the risk of talking at too low a level of detail, which is the most common situation. And the other person will not be able to understand what you are saying, will not hear your message, and it will be pretty much a failed communication attempt most times. So the main construct that we work on here is what's called the power of frameworks. And a framework is simply a way to take a complex topic and break it down into pieces and then have varying levels of detail that are available so that I can match the appropriate level of context for the amount of context that the individual on the receiving end of my message has. And perfect example of a framework is my 4 pillars of leadership. These 4 pillars represent essentially everything in the world from a leadership perspective that I talk about, that I work on, that I've worked with my clients over the last 10 years. And I can boil it down into being part of one of those 4 pillars. So that's the highest level of context when I introduce that.
Yeah. Now you're communicating at the level of your listener so that they understand. You don't assume unconscious competence.
Yes.
So you make sure it's not there. But okay, so the advantage of communicating, let's say the strength of the team, the purpose of the team, and the other issues you've mentioned. Okay, what's the outcome? Why did you make a pillar on communication? Why is it so important according to you?
Because doing the job as a leader is not enough, plain and simple. What I mean is that if you do not effectively communicate the value that you and your team provide and add to the company, you will be in a position where other people will make assumptions about what you do and do not do. It is 100% within your power to communicate the message and the story that you want, that's going to serve you, that's going to serve your team, it's going to set you both and everybody up for the right opportunities. However, it is on you 100%. You cannot rely on just showing up and doing the work and hoping that other people recognize it. It will not happen.
Yes,
that's why I believe it is so important.
There's quite a few case studies where they work so hard to do a lot of things for the company, don't communicate, and are forgotten by the company.
Exactly.
And dissolved because no one understands what they're doing. So
That's
good
right.
point. Good point.
That's right. Thank you.
Okay, next is matrix.
Metrics, yes. Leading with metrics. This is pillar number 4. And this kind of brings a lot of pieces together. So measurement perspective, we can always say that the famous Drucker quote, what gets measured gets managed. And that's certainly true. And for a long time, I didn't necessarily believe that everything should be measured. However, as I've evolved, as I've learned lots of tools, as I've worked with tons of leaders and coaches myself, I have learned how to take measurement and translate the ultimate goals of the organization to the individual on the front lines working day in and day out. As one of the most common challenges that people who are on the front lines experience is I have no idea how my work connects to what this big picture is that we're going for, because nobody is connecting the dots in between there. And I believe that metrics are the absolute key to do that.
Okay, give us an example.
Sure. Let's say that we have a customer success or let's take sales, a more general example. A sales leader, right, has a target of sales quota. Every quarter, every sales leader in every company has the same thing. Now, that sales target and that quota and that revenue generated essentially amounts to what's called a lagging indicator. In other words, it's not going to change after it's reported. We made $1 million this quarter. We made 10 million in sales this quarter, whatever the number is. Okay, so there's an opportunity, and a lot of people have experienced this, where a sales leader will say, well, we didn't hit our number last quarter. You need to go fix it. And that's the message to the team. And I'm oversimplifying here, but it's kind of the general gist. And lots of people, when I've asked this question, have said, yes, I've received some kind of a message that is that vague, right? We have a problem with this lagging indicator and you need to go solve it. And it's like, okay, what does that exactly mean? Now, if we left it at that level, we'd be doing ourselves and our team a huge disservice, because there's a gigantic gap. And they're like, well, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing because I think that's the right thing to do. But I don't really know how what I do on a daily basis, hopefully it ends up influencing this giant big number that we're supposed to get to. So instead, what I would encourage leaders to do in that situation is to break down all of the leading indicators that translate up to ultimately influencing that lagging indicator of the sales number. So these might be things like, number of sales calls booked, number of sales calls made, number of demos provided, number of connections made on LinkedIn, number of messages sent. And these are all individual leading indicators where the most important ones will drive that sales number. Now, to take it one step further, and think about this from the individual sales rep's perspective, I would put that in a target from a daily basis of the activities that they need to do to hit those leading indicators to ultimately translate to the lagging indicator. So this is going to be the number of sales calls that I make every day. And it needs to get down to a binary yes or no. That's where measurement can have a real impact and show that if I make 50 sales calls per day, for example, and I can answer yes, then I know that that influences the number of sales calls this team as a whole has made, which ultimately is going to influence the amount of revenue closed on a quarterly basis. So if the leadership is only staying focused on the lagging indicator, there's a huge risk that there's a big disconnect down the chain. However, when we break it down and we look at the leading indicators, and then we look at the activities on a daily basis, and we get to a yes or no, then we can clearly draw a line and everyone can see exactly how their work every single day is directly related to what is going to be measured on a quarterly basis.
Now, sometimes they see, okay, I've done 20 calls today. I've done 20 calls tomorrow. But they don't make the translation to what does this mean at the macro level, at the organizational level.
Yes. And the reason for that is that the leadership might probably focused on the revenue number, the lagging indicator. The individuals then are focused on the daily activities, and it's the middle ground that is undefined. When that is undefined, you will still have a huge chasm that is really difficult to cross. So as an individual, I would want to know in that situation is if I make these 20 calls or 50 calls a day, what's the leading indicator that is going to influence? In the middle, that ultimately, if that leading indicator hits this level, then that will directly influence the lagging indicator, because the activity by itself does not influence the lagging indicator of the sales revenue. It is too big of a leap. So we have to have that middle layer, and that's the job of people who are the managers and directors of the sales organization, to provide that translation of exactly how the daily activities work to drive the leading indicators, which ultimately drive the lagging indicators.
So the manager does need to translate.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. 100%.
Good. So those are the 4 pillars of your book. Wonderful. Yes. Now, you also mentioned that how can someone save 5 hours a week? Can you comment on that?
Sure. So all leaders are busy. And let's just, that's plain and simple. It's universally known. It's universally found in everybody I've ever worked with. Everybody's busy. And what I've done, and part of this is part of the leading yourself pillar, is I have a whole focus on mastering your time. And when it comes to mastering your time, there's one incredibly powerful question that has to be answered first. And I'll share that question with you. Without this question, nothing will change. With this question, everything can change. And that is exactly how many of my clients have gotten to the point of saving 5 hours a week within just a few weeks of implementing the strategies and tactics, but starting with this question. The question is this: who is in control of your time? And there are only 2 answers. Answer number 1 is you are in control of your time. Answer number 2 is your environment is in control of your time. And by environment, what I mean is your emails, your clients, your bosses, your execs, your colleagues, etc. There's kind of everything that goes on around you. So this is a huge psychological piece to recognize who's in control. And for the individuals who are able to, even if they don't feel it in the moment, but when they are presented with this in the background of why this is so important, make that switch and say, I am in control, then the world can, everything in their life can change, right? Much like on the coaching side, until someone takes a complete ownership of what it is they're going to do, we can't really help them. However, once they commit and say, yes, I am in control of my time, then I have a whole bunch of tools to help them control and deal with the never-ending flow of email, never-ending flow of Slack messages, constant demands from internal and external parties. And it's about applying those tools, but under the umbrella that I'm in control.
But let's say, example, the boss says, look, you got to go to this meeting every Monday for 2 hours, and there are too many people in the meeting. Let's say there are 15 people, so no one, and there's positioning, and telling them what's the information. So they don't get much value from that meeting, but they have to go because their boss said so.
Sure.
So what do you suggest in that case?
Excellent question. Okay, so in that case, number one is probably going to depend somewhat on their relationship with their boss, right? And if something is going to deserve your time, regardless of who told you to go there, even if you're his boss, even if it is your CEO, said you have to be there, it is on you to confirm or deny whether or not it is a valuable use of your time to be in that meeting. And here's the reason. You, the individual, whatever level you are in your organization, does not matter. You, the individual, are the only person who knows how to most effectively use your time to serve yourself, your customers, your company, your colleagues, everything. There's only one person who can decide how to best use your time, and that's you. So in that case, if this was a disaster of a meeting and it was absolutely 100% a waste of my time and 2 hours a week was going down the drain, I would very strategically have a conversation with my boss to provide the direct feedback of exactly what was happening in this meeting, and also make a recommendation on how to achieve whatever it was the original objective for me going was without me having to be there. And I'd be very upfront about it. And I would encourage my clients to do the same, because ultimately your boss doesn't know how to spend your time. Your CEO doesn't know how to spend your time. Only you can make that decision. Again, coming back to the question of who's in control, because you ultimately have to deliver on what it is that you signed up for, which is great, but it's 100% within your control. And as soon as we start abdicating control to other people, then we lose focus of that, and it can be really difficult to get out.
Great. Thank you so very much. We're coming to the end of our podcast. How can people get a hold of you?
All right. So you can simply drop me an email if you would like to have a conversation about, leadership and leadership coaching. My email is Nils, Nils, at 3030dayleadership.com. Also grab a free digital copy of my best-selling book, 30-Day Leadership Playbook, your guide to becoming the leader you have always wanted to be. Just go to 3030dayleadership.com/book, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Nils. Most interesting.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We would love to know what you thought of this podcast. Write us an email at drkatrina, with a K, at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. We would love to hear what you liked and what we could improve. This podcast has been sponsored by excellentexecutivecoaching.com.
Thank you for listening to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. You can subscribe to all future podcasts at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. Join us each Wednesday to learn more about the latest trends in leadership techniques and bring your coaching to the next level. To learn more about Dr. Burrus' CEO Mastermind, use the contact form at excellentexecutivecoaching.com.